teenagers. You've got to understand YouTube, because that's basically, my kids don't watch TV anymore. They watch YouTube. It's something else. And I have a daughter who is 12 years old, and she just got back from camp as well. She's something else. She was in 6th grade last year, which is middle school for us, and she went from being 12 to 17 overnight. Makeup, hair, an hour in the bathroom every morning, and just like became a young woman overnight, which was I wasn't ready for at all. And what I do, my day job is I'm a marriage and family therapist. I see clients basically 3 or 4 days a week, and I work with mostly, I do probably about a third of what I do is couples work, and about 2/3 is family work, where I'm working a lot with families in transitions, lots with families with teenagers with behavior issues, children and teenagers with school, academic issues, performance issues, etc. And so that's generally my day job. I'm also an author. I wrote a book called Homework, A Parent's Guide to Helping Out Without Freaking Out. And it's based primarily a leadership manual on how parents can lead their kids through the school years, and on academic issues versus helping them, because there's very few kids that actually want help. One of my daughter's first complete sentences, was, "I can do it myself." She doesn't want help. The root word for help is basically you can't do it on your own. You require somebody else to lift something because you cannot lift it on your own. So it kind of has a negative connotation right away. So kids don't really need our help in general. They need our leadership. So the book's kind of more of a leadership manual. And I want to give one away. I want to give one away to the parent who has the most school-age K through 12 kids right now. So raise your hand if you have one. At least one K through 12. This is going to be easy. Only 2 of you? No. That would be a short book, which was go on vacation, relax, leave them alone.
Yes, you do. We help write papers,
I met this guy. I'll digress for a minute. A friend of mine in an airport one day, and I told him about the book, and he said, "Well, I got a story for you." He said, "I got this neighbor, and she's helping her kid every day with she texts him in the morning to wake him up. She goes through his agenda every day to figure out when he's going to do his homework and what assignments are due and what tests are coming up." And I'm like, that happens a lot these days, and parents are really helping kids out a lot. And he says, "But he's a junior." And I say, "Yeah, I know. I mean, these kids got to prepare for, graduation and, going off to college." And he said, "He's a junior in college." So, yeah, I see it a lot. There's just that, the helicopter parent term came, this is kind of an anti-helicopter parent book. Helicopter parent term came from college parents. So we really only have 2 right now? I'm going to give one to both of you then. What's that?
Kids, do they count?
Yes, they count. I'm going to give you one too. Can you hand one more back? You can give it to the mom or the dad, and one more back behind you. It's not a book that you should hand someone and say, "Hey, you really need this." So doesn't work out so well. But that's about all I'm going to talk about with the book today. So I'm also on the faculty of Virginia Tech Graduate School of Marriage and Family Therapy. I teach a course on psychotherapy with children and adolescents within a family context, and I'll actually be teaching it tomorrow. We get to go back and do that tomorrow. And that's a tremendous amount of fun. Working with students, working with the new folks that are kind of moving along is a lot of fun. But what we're here to talk about today is burnout. And fortunately, we have a small group, so we can do this a bit more like a conversation than a presentation. So what I want to get a sense of is One of the gentlemen that came in said, "So are you expecting everybody to come into this conference who's burning out?" And I said, well, there's probably some people who might be burning out. There might be some people who are program managers dealing with burnout within their staff. From some folks that kind of want to prevent burnout. So I want to start with just asking you, how do you know that burnout is beginning to happen, whether in yourself or whether in other people that you know? What are the signs that you see? Lack of energy. Lack of energy, yeah. Mm-hmm. Inappropriate anger. You're nodding with that. Defensiveness. Like when you're trying to give them some feedback on something, more defensiveness than normal. Right. When there might not have been defensiveness before. Yeah. Not returning emails and calls. Yeah. That was mine. I was beginning to. When I was beginning to burn out at one of my jobs. Yeah. Forgetfulness. Loss of joy. Yeah.
Saying things you didn't mean to say in ways you didn't mean to say.
Right. Being impulsive as far as saying things that you shouldn't have said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Loss of patience. Yeah. Yeah. Venting. A lot of complaining. Finding a scapegoat, finding that one person. Oftentimes it's not a person, it's the organization. What's the thing that we used to say? Well, I didn't used to say it because I'm only 50, but that people used to say in the 60s. Whose fault was it? The man. As if there was a man that was the problem. So we begin to do a lot of blaming. Yeah. Yeah. Loss of vision. They've lost that sense of why they're doing something. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Now, normally what we do is during burnout prevention seminars, we talk about one specific symptom, which is self-care. And that if somehow we magically worked on self-care, then burnout would go away. Okay, and I kind of view it a bit like a medical model. If you're having headaches all the time, and your response to that, when you didn't used to have headaches all the time, and your response to that is to treat only the headaches, then you're only going to get so far, because maybe there's some other underlying cause for it. So to say that because it's like telling the person that's got anger control, you need to work on your anger, and that will reduce your burnout. It won't. I do a lot of solution-focused counseling, so I am kind of a big advocate of focusing on the symptom and then trying to reduce the symptom and then seeing what happens. I don't think it works so well with burnout, because if we work on, the forgetfulness, if we work on all of these symptoms that we just said, trying to reduce those, burnout's still going to be there. So we've got to look at more of what the base is. And that's what today's about. Okay. So that's why the typical advice doesn't work. The issue is, and this is going to be the piece that I'm going to try to help you understand and help explain, because I've only done this workshop a couple times, so some of these ideas are still in transition for me. It's about our relationship with our job. That is where burnout occurs. The problem is, we're trying to have a relationship with something that doesn't exist physically. Okay? A couple years ago, during Smart Marriages, and it might have been last year with NARME, a bunch of folks were wearing a T-shirt. Anybody see this? It said, "I love my marriage." And I think it was because of the Fireproof movie. I think they were giving the T-shirts away. And I kept seeing them, and I kept thinking, I love my wife. I don't love my marriage. I can't love my marriage. It's not a person. Okay, so to say I love my job, there's a trap in that. There's a risk in that. Because it's not something that can love us back. It's not anything. It's a construct in our mind. So the problem is, when things aren't going well, we start to think this in a response, which is, I would like to go to HE Double Toothpicks, but I work there and I don't want to see you every day. We start hating our jobs. These two statements that we use a lot that are relationship statements. I love my job. I hate my job. We can't love or hate something that doesn't really exist. We can, but it does us absolutely no good because it's not a back and forth relationship. So, with that in mind, I want to give you some background. My apologies if I get too theoretical, and my apologies if I get too elementary, depending on your level of education on these concepts. There's a gentleman by the name of Murray Bowen, who really is the grandfather of family systems work, really the grandfather of systems theory. He was the first person that started thinking about a bunch of different individual pieces interacting as a system. And his basic premise was that people are constantly trying to negotiate these two different states of being, which is togetherness and individuality. If you think about it, we're constantly doing that. We constantly want to be part of a couple, but we also want to be our own person. We want to be an employee and do the team building stuff. There was a couple of team building activities I saw yesterday. But we also want to hold back. Okay. Some of us have this general area where we want to be even more part of a team or more of an individual. And it was interesting watching. Was anybody involved in the hula hoop activity yesterday? Yeah. It's a huge team building activity. And I hate those because I'm pretty strongly individual. I'm not as much of a team or group person. I get uncomfortable with it. And I was just watching it because I wasn't a part of it. But normally in those situations, I'd be rolling my eyes like, oh gosh, here we go. Because I seek that individuality. Many people, my son, my wife, are very much want to be part of a system, want to be part of a club, want to be joined, want to be part of a team. And so Bowen's concepts is that we kind of go back and forth from these two somewhat unhealthy states of being. Fusion, which kind of means that you've lost your sense of self. You are a part of a system, and that's it. I just watched I Am Legend recently. I don't know if anybody watched that. Where there was this one scene where he's kind of going through that building with a flashlight, and he sees the hive. And it's basically they have lost their sense of individuality. They've just become, a hive. So when we're stressed, sometimes we get really strong into being fused with others, where we lose our sense of self. And then sometimes in reaction to that, we go to cut off. I'm done. I'm sick of this. Okay? Think about the old movies and stuff, you're no child of mine. I break with thee. I'm out of here. We're getting a divorce. All those are reactions to fusion, which the reaction to fusion is cutting off. So when we're under stress, we go back and forth between these two areas, where we lose our sense of individuality and we reject our sense of belonging. The goal, the key, is to find somewhere in the middle. To find somewhere in the middle to be able to exist. So there's a couple of things I want you to think about. When you're thinking about your job, when you're thinking about your work and the work you do with people. I love little quotes like this. This actually came from a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Hal Runkle, who wrote a book called Scream-Free Parenting. I was the director of training and leadership development for the Scream-Free Institute for a few years, helping them develop a training program for professionals. We've been to NARME last year. We've been to Smart Marriages previous to that a number of times. And this is one of his really key catchphrases with these concepts, which is, am I responsible for or am I responsible to? Theoretically, I'm responsible for only one person, me. Think about that. Some people are nodding their heads, some people are like, maybe not. I mean, sometimes you think, okay, wait, I'm responsible for my children. Legally, maybe, in some respects, but really, you're not. You can't be. I I remember when my son was an infant, was a newborn, and he didn't poop for like a week. I couldn't get him to, and I was going online trying to figure out what to do about it, and everyone was saying, just relax, he'll figure it out. I wanted to be responsible for him, but I couldn't. I could only be responsible to him. I had a lot of responsibilities to my kids when they were little, and as they get older, the responsibility too decreases. But a lot of time, burnout occurs because we are feeling like we're responsible for something that we can't control. Okay? What's one of the biggest things that we can't control is helping professionals? What's that? Their choices.
Yeah.
Human outcomes. What your clients, what your population, what your students end up doing. And what's the biggest pressure that particularly line workers feel when they're dealing with their supervisors? Increasing outcomes. So the problem is with a lot of burnout is that the outcomes are we can't get the outcome to happen. And we feel like we're responsible for making that happen. One of the things we were chatting earlier about in military installations and just the volume of work and just how much there is and knowing that you can't get to it all. But you're expected to. And now there's this, I'm responsible for meeting with 100 people this week. Good luck. And if you buy into that, responsibility for, then burnout's going to begin to occur. So this is a big one to think about. When you're thinking about your job, when you're thinking about if you're a manager or a supervisor and you're setting expectations for your staff, if you're setting expectations that they are responsible for something that they cannot control the outcome, then that's going to be a big problem. So, it's one idea to keep in mind. This is another one I love. This is another one of Hal Runkle's. Taking something seriously versus taking something personally. We were talking about defensiveness. Why does somebody get defensive generally? Is because they're taking it personally. Because they're hearing it as if you're saying it about them. I remember one of my first bosses, I was an elementary school counselor, and I was starting to get defensive about my principal, what she was saying to me, and she stopped me and kind of rested her hand on my arm, and she said, "Neil, I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about your job." And it didn't fit. I had spent years preparing for this job. It was one of the first jobs I ever had, and she telling me I stink at it. Therefore, I stink. She wasn't telling me I stink at it. She was just telling me I needed improvement in one area. But I began to take that, and that was the job I began to burn out on. I began to take the job personally, way too personally. And the problem is, in our field, if we take it personally, when there's so many moving parts that we can't control, if we take it personally, we are bound to burn out because we're not going to get where we need to get to. So think about your job for a minute. Think about your people that you work with, people that work for you. And you're thinking about personally versus seriously, responsible to versus responsible for. What thoughts come to your mind? What examples come to your mind? Who'd like to share? I know it's early. Thanks.
I had a previous experience as a customer service representative, helping people administer their health benefits and 401ks and things like that. So I was constantly on phones. So obviously they would call upset and they would just insult me because I was inaccurate, I didn't have any information, but obviously they were angry with their company system, and so they would just take it on me. So that would oftenly tick me off or upset myself, and then, sometimes the call wouldn't go correctly, and so then my boss had to, sit with me, just don't take it personally, they're just angry with their company, it's not with you, so just take it calmly, and so you can help them better, so, yeah.
Right. How easy was that to do?
Well, it was just managing myself, just remembering myself, it's not with you, just take it calmly and just ignore probably their actions or probably their words towards you, and that actually helped a lot, so yeah.
Good. And that's really hard for folks that are in this field. There are certain fields that can handle it pretty easily. My wife is in computer systems and computer sales, and she can handle such a significant amount of nastiness and abuse that I can't even imagine. She has a different mindset than I do, though. She can let stuff roll off a lot easier. She's not as sensitive. I grew up with that word. Neil, he's so sensitive. People never said it positively. Did you ever notice that? I don't know if anybody else. Because sensitivity is a great thing, but, yeah, it was never really said that way. Yes, sir.
No, I'm sorry, I was late.
No problem.
We're in social service,
Yeah.
and our job is dealing with other people's problems. So people are coming to you with issues, and they're not attacking you. They're just, you got to deal with how people express themselves.
Right.
And it's not a personal attack on you unless you are not doing something that needs to be done.
Right. Unless you somehow personally offended them, which obviously you haven't.
People come in the door.
Yeah.
The first thing I do is create some humor, and that pisses them off, and then I bring them back down to
Right.
the point that I'm not your problem.
Right.
I'm the one that's going to help you solve it.
I can't imagine anybody being pissed off at you.
I'm standing.
Because either you have
for 4 days, and I'm also a high school track coach. I don't get to sit on the it bothers me.
Doesn't he have the absolute best voice you've ever heard? We were in the one of the things yesterday, and you chimed in on something. I'm like, oh my goodness, why is he not in front of the class? I could listen to him forever. So.
I did that on purpose. I was asked to do that.
Oh, well, that's a shame for us. So, yeah. This is the hardest one. The hardest one is not taking things personally. And from the clients that we work with, from the students that we work with, but also and that's right, it's the problem is the problem. We're not the problem. And when we start thinking that we are the problem, that really starts to wear on our self-esteem, wear on our sense of taking it personally.
I think that this is it's a very difficult thing to be alive in these times with this career, because I feel personally responsible to improve my skills. And I know I'm a pioneer. I know all of us are pioneers. This has not been going on for centuries. I'm inventing things all the time. I'm writing things. I'm creating models out of what I know. I'm learning new methods. And I feel completely passionate and devoted to personal responsibility to learn this, to know this, to write this, to create this. Because if I don't do it, it won't happen. And I'll just be like the person that they went to that they told me about before, who almost either didn't serve them or did something that was entirely inappropriate. So I'm feeling professionally responsible. I'm also feeling personally responsible, and which means I've got to know how to manage my stress and where to draw the line. Luckily, I've got a fabulous personal life that doesn't bleed over. So I'm holding all 3 levels.
But the interesting thing that you mentioned was everything in your list had something in common. None of it had to do with other people. Your goal is with other people, but all of it is about things that you can measure within yourself. Learning, writing, developing, and all those things you are responsible for. And now you're responsible too, getting that message out and hopefully transforming lives. But everything that you mentioned, it was about yourself. And that's the big shift. When you can help yourself do that, and you help your workers and the other folks that you work with do that. That's the big shift. One of the things that I've really shifted on is my job as a father is to be the best father possible, regardless of the outcome. Now, how do my kids turn out? Well, it's got a lot to do with what I do. It doesn't have everything to do with what I do. Blame the parents. No. The parents have something to do with it. But, my job is to be the best father possible. And then what my children do is what my children do with that. My job as a husband is to be the best husband possible. As a therapist, as a teacher, I can't control the outcomes. I can control myself. Yes, sir.
Process. process of how to solve that problem and also how to solve future problems so you don't have to come back to them.
Your job, if you're an educator, is to teach. It's not for them to learn. You know, your job is not for them to learn the material. Do you hear that? Do you see the difference? Your job is to teach the material. Whether they learn it or not has a lot to do with how you taught it. But your job is to focus on how well did you teach it. Because if they're not learning it, that might not have to do with you. That might not have to do with you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, for me, one measure of if I've done it right, because I clued in on this a while ago. I pastor a church and have a staff, and I manage a nonprofit and a staff there. When I focus on when and how to deal with a situation and take responsibility for speaking the truth and love doing it right, I was astounded when I had a bad outcome, but I felt great because I knew I handled it to the best of my ability and I had really done it well. And so you can kind of win either way. And for me, that's almost a measure now. If the outcome that I want I don't get, but I know I did it the right way, I just go, wow, that was rough, and I did the best I could.
Yes, exactly. And I did the best I could. I began thinking about this concept when I was at I was up in Fort Richardson, Alaska, doing a training for about 25 family advocacy professionals. And Fort Rich is a highly deployed Army post, and a lot of young mothers who are isolated. You know, they're up in Alaska, which you have no idea how far Alaska is until you try to get there. And you realize, you know, it's 5 hours from Seattle, for goodness sakes. So these folks are really isolated. So these workers are really, really stressed out. And I began to see this I don't know, it was like a 1,000-yard stare with the advocacy workers. They were really beginning like, I don't care. Hey, it's turning into just a paycheck. Because they really could not see that they were making a difference. The onslaught of stuff was so big, and they weren't feeling like they were making a difference. So all they were focusing on was the outcomes, and the outcomes looked miserable. You know, who still has the highest level of domestic violence? Army families, enlisted Army families. And that hasn't changed regardless of the hard work of these family advocacy professionals. So one of the problems is if we focus on the outcomes, we're going to encourage burnout. The problem is, what is everybody focused on these days? Outcomes. How do we measure? What's the data? You know, the school counseling, I do a lot of work with the American School Counseling Association. I do workshops for them, and I do state workshops as well. Everybody's talking about data and outcomes. And now I'm telling you, don't focus on the outcomes. Because if you do, you will burn out. Now, a part of you has to focus on the outcomes to generate the data to justify what you're doing. But if that is what you focus on, okay, if that's the primary issue, it's you're creating an environment ripe for burnout. Because you can't control that. You can influence it, but you can't control it. So, did you have a comment, ma'am? Did you want to comment?
Well, I'm just thinking that our employee evaluations are very difficult in this concept because they're really based on taking personal responsibility for the outcomes. And I'm trying to wrap my head around how you approach that differently.
Right. Well, one piece of approaching it differently is looking at the evaluations, if you have that power and abilities, and looking at possibly having more things that are focused on the professional development and skills acquisition of the professional versus the outcome. The reality is we're living in an outcome-based world. I lived among, it sounds like I became one, but I lived among the Mennonites in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I lived in an area where there were a lot of Mennonites, and their concept is to be in the world but not of the world. So they live with us, they interact with us, but they're not of us. And so, I love that idea because it really allowed them to stay true to what their individual values were. These were the horse and buggy kind of Mennonites. And So, yeah, acknowledging that that stuff is happening, but on your day-to-day basis, when you're working with your clients, when you're doing the work that you do, if that is your focus, you're going to increase the ability for burnout. You can influence the outcomes. My goodness, if we couldn't influence the outcomes, why are we doing this work? Yet, if that is our only focus, then the burnout is going to be more and more likely. Does that make sense? That's the hard part of this process, is acknowledging that those are the realities. But if we buy into that, if we buy completely into that reality, and things aren't going well, burnout is going to increase.
It's just a rephrase of the old saying, ultimately, whose behavior can you control?
Whose behavior can you control? Yes. We've learned so much of this in school, that our job is not to, we can lead the horse to water. That's a huge old saying. Yet, everything that we're being told from, the higher leadership is that that's not really true. But we've got to remember that that is true. That is true.
But you also have to concentrate on team concept. Even in sports, when I coach track and field,
Mm-hmm.
I encourage children to finish the race no matter what the result, because people don't understand the point system.
Right.
Sixth place gets 1 point.
Right.
I've won several track meets, team track meets, by 1 point. And it's important that you start something and you finish.
Right.
And if you're weak in one area and someone else is stronger, then you have to shift the burden.
Right.
As a team, you have to stay focused.
And definitely the teamwork in what we do as an organization. If you're working within an organization, I didn't do that well working within organizations, so I chose to do most of my work is now solo, because I tend to not do that enough. I tend to focus too much on the individual goals versus the team goals. And when I tried to be part of the team, I began to burn out. Now, my reaction to that was cutting off, unfortunately. I didn't learn how to negotiate these things. But in the meantime, I've worked with some organizations where I've done a much better job of it. I've grown up a lot, which helps. Okay, so I want you to start thinking about the job. Remember when we talked about the job as the relationship? The problem with that is it's not a person. One of the issues that a lot of people have with their relationship is that they begin to look at it like a bad boyfriend or a bad girlfriend. We tend to use the word bad boyfriend, though, don't we? Are there bad girlfriends? Okay, I had one or two. But I'll just say bad boyfriend for the sake of brevity. What's the bad boyfriend complex? What does that mean? God, he's bad, but I can change him. If I just worked hard enough, I can change things. If I just, okay. The problem with that is that's a fusion reaction. Somehow I can change you by trying hard enough. I was involved with an organization that I wasn't treated very well by, and I was doing a lot of work for what ended up becoming pretty free. And my wife would be like, Neil, you are so busy with all these other stuff. Please just stop working for them or require that you be paid for these things. And I'm like, but they have so much potential. This could go so far. And then she finally said to me, Neil, this is your bad boyfriend. I'm like, what? She said, this is your bad boyfriend. If you try hard enough, he'll change. He'll respect you. That somehow you'll catch their eye in a way that they'll say, you're valuable. And they'll begin to look at you differently and treat you better. And they won't. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's the whole Bowen differentiation stuff again. Which is, I'm thinking I can change something that I cannot change. So when we begin to do this, when we begin to expect something from our job that our job cannot provide, and our job can't provide it because it's not a person. Our job is not a person. Our job is an idea. Our job is a construct. It can't provide us with anything. It can't. We have to provide it within ourselves. The problem is when we try to do that, when we try to get something from something that's not a thing, that's not a person, it begins to burn us out. So one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm working with people that are beginning to burn out is, What will I get what I'm expecting? What happens when your expectations are just not going to be met? What are the two choices? When your expectations for your job is just not going to be met. Change your expectations, or what? Change your job. Change your job, exactly. If you quit, okay, just like, screw it, I quit, I'm out of here. That is, remember that thing with fusion and cutoff? That's cutoff. Because it's an emotional reaction to too much stress. If you think, I need to just work harder. I was driving to my hotel yesterday afternoon. It was about 6 o'clock, 6:30 in the evening. And this guy had a stack of these like internal office envelopes that he was taking to his apartment. You know, he looked like a lawyer or something. And I'm like, oh gosh, that guy is, he just looked burned out. And he was probably 25, he looked like 38. Just like, you know, if I try hard enough, I'll get what I want. And I'm just thinking, that guy is just looking like a burnout. He's just a burnout case. But he's a fused burnout, if I just try harder. Now the hard part is, what do you do when the expectations that are put on you are way higher than your pay scale, than your number of hours that you have? What do you do? Anybody been in that situation? Yeah?
You go to your supervisor and know you need help, or they need to reprioritize what they're doing.
Right, go to your supervisor, tell them you need help. They need to prioritize, which is great. And if you have a great supervisor, good for you. I see somebody who that might not work so well. Your face tells your emotions, ma'am. So we won't use names in here. So since this is being recorded, what do you think might happen? Here, let me give you this.
At some time in the past, with one of my supervisors taking my problems to that supervisor who was really trying hard to do well in themselves, my needs really wasn't addressed, even though she did the best to her ability, because she was under the data-driven outcome herself. So she was trying to produce results that was expected of her, and I was supposed to help produce the results that she needed, you know, dealing with the clients. I was supposed to get this outcome to produce these data-driven statistics showing that A, B, C, and D is done. But at the same time, I did what I was supposed to do to ensure that A, B, C, D could be done on the part of my clients, but I could not make them do it. So many times they did not do A, B, C, and D, and it seemed like I was blamed for that, and so I was pressurized into feeling like it was my fault, and I couldn't differentiate between that. And I kept getting caught up personally, and so even though I know that I did my part to ensure that they could do it, gave them materials that they needed, the information, whatever they needed, if they did not always do what they were supposed to do. And I ended up really getting sick because I got really stressed. I took it personally. I didn't separate my professional self. You are doing the best that you can. You have given them the information. You have told them that they can do X, Y, and Z to achieve it.
Can anybody relate to that story? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the dilemma, I love the word dilemma, because it just acknowledges that, you know, what's the definition of dilemma, if I can remember it right, is that it's, you know, you have more than one choice, but no choice is favorable. There's no good choice. There are choices. None of them are good. A lot of our choices in life in these types of situations are dilemmas. The problem is we think we only have one choice, which is to work harder. Take it personally. We have the ability to say no. We have the ability to say, I'm doing everything I can. Do you have specific suggestions on how I can change my skills so that we could possibly improve the outcome? I'd love to hear it. Besides forging the results, I'd love to hear it. But other than that, what else can we do? Because no, I'm not going to work more than the hours that I've said I'm going to work. Because that's a huge piece of burnout, is you work too much. But that's not the problem. The problem is not that you work too much. The problem is you're working too much because of the pressure, because you're taking it personally. I work like crazy. I don't know. I've lost track of the number of hours a week I work. 60, 65. Okay. I love it. You know, somebody said, it was actually, who's the director from Baltimore who did Hairspray? Oh, gosh. You know who I mean? John Waters. I heard an interview from him. It's funny, we're in Baltimore and remembering him because he's from here. He said once, I heard him say, I work all the time, and it never feels like work. And that's me. And that's, fortunately, I've been able to structure my life and my job in a way that, my jobs, in a way that it's not burnout. It's not burnout. So it's not about the number of hours. It's, are you doing something with those hours that are meaningful and fruitful for you? If they're not, then it's burnout. The hard part in that situation is to say, what else can I do to improve these outcomes? And are you willing to do those things? Well, I want you to stay late. Are you willing to stay late? Great. If you want to stay late, if you're not, no. What are they going to do? Fire you? Something we say jokingly sometimes. I said that. I began to say that in the last year of my work as a school counselor. I was like, what is she going to do? Fire me? I was beginning to burn out anyway, but now you've got to decide. Is it worth it? Is it worth the burnout? Is it worth getting ill to keep this job? Well, sometimes it might be. But that you're going to have to prepare yourself for the eventuality of burnout then. And then focusing on the self-care is a good idea. Palliative care, preventative care. But there's a huge amount of strength in saying, this is as much as I'm going to do. This is as much as I choose to do for this part of my life. For this part of my life, this is what I'm going to give you. Because the stunning part is I think we have more fears of somebody saying you're going to be fired than in actuality. That's my theory. If we are doing our job descriptions, if we are satisfying the job descriptions, but we are not influencing the outcomes, my goodness, I hope you don't have outcomes in your job description. Okay, you do?
That's why I brought a question up.
In the job description, not in the evaluation, but in the job description. Gosh, curious about that. I'm obviously not agreeing with it.
You add to that salary people, and the expectation is not 40 hours.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But, a lot of times, you have those outcomes, but those outcomes are not necessarily generated within the agency that you're working for. It's something that you have a grant from the federal government.
You have a grant for the federal government, and that's what's asking for the outcomes. Yes, exactly. And you'll give them the outcomes, but the problem is we begin chasing our tails. I do this for teachers' unions as well, this training, and it's a huge one in teachers these days. Their salary is based on, their funding is based on the grades. And, so there's some head shaking on, you know what, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, but there's also this acknowledgement of the truth of this, that if we begin chasing the outcomes, if we begin chasing that, the outcomes are a reality, but if that is our focus, we'll burn out because it's not something we can control. We can control ourselves, and that's it. Yes, sir?
I started the 501c3 after doing this work for 40 years. And as I said, I deal with teamwork. And I trained my staff to work as a team. We cross-train everyone to the point that anyone can step up and help somebody. Anytime someone starts having problems, they go to a coworker and they review the issues and they come up with a solution, but we all pitch in, including me. This is more work to me than my job. Right. Just being isolated and not being able to go to work every day is bothering me because I've been here for 5 days and I'm on the phone constantly trying to help deal with solutions back there. But that's the way we function, and everything is about the team. Nobody is isolated to the point that they have to do it all themselves. And the evaluation is the team, not on any individual.
Right. And so how do you think that's going to insulate you from burnout, or your people from burnout?
I've been burnt out several times in several different occupations, but it's a matter of I persevere because I survive. I'm a Vietnam combat vet, and my focus is on as long as I'm breathing, I'll get it done.
But you have this great opportunity for these, probably eager professionals that you're working with this nonprofit to be able to reduce that burnout. And that's one of the big things is you're not going to be placing individual blame. Yet if you begin to set up expectations that we're going to measure ourselves solely by the outcome of what we do, then it's ripe for burnout.
We focus on the
Quality of our work.
We get the outcomes that the government or anyone else is expecting.
Right.
Not relevant to me.
Right. The problem is the pressures of the managers. Raise your hand if you are one of these managers we're talking about. Now, are you the sole manager, or are you reporting these numbers to somebody else? You're reporting these numbers to somebody else, whether that's somebody in your organization or the federal government. If you buy in...
I'm not looking at anybody,
That's why we're not using names in here. But if you buy into that myth that we can control the outcomes, then you're producing a burnout-laden organization, because it's not something that we have to focus. We have to observe it. We have to acknowledge it. But if we focus on that, then we're teaching to the test. It's the worst thing you can do to a teacher. Teach them this the way so that they can get good on the test. And what's the problem with that is the focus stops becoming on being the best professional we can be, and instead becomes about adapting our skills just to produce the numbers. I know I'm swimming hugely upstream here, but I also think all the focus on data in the past 5 years or so has produced more burnout than ever before, because we're beginning to teach to the data. We're beginning to focus our work to the data. We have to have data. Okay, that's a reality. I'm not going to stop that. I'm not even going to try to stop that. We get to decide, each of us individually, whether that's going to be our focus, though. Okay, let me keep moving here. Yes?
As you talk about that, and I'm a Head Start director, so.
You're a Head Start director.
Yeah, so we're definitely, there's a strong focus on outcome. And outcomes really have a lot to do right now with whether or not you can even, continue to keep your funding. So we've had to take a different look and a different approach, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I had to step back from outcomes and the way that I'm working with my team now, because what happens is that then the services that you're providing to children and families, those services are no longer as great because you're so focused on the outcomes that the services don't really happen, not the way that they should. So we've put our focus more on, how we're working with the children and families, and what is happening is that the outcomes are just coming naturally.
Yes.
So that is working for us.
That requires some faith in...
It does, but I have a great team.
Yeah, and they have a great leader, it sounds like, because you've got faith that if they do good work, the outcomes will flow. People do what you love, the money will come. I never had that faith. So, yes.
Well, and I think to some degree, the outcomes we've got to keep in perspective too, and not personify them, that they are a very immediate measure of perhaps what is or what is not happening, that I have to keep in mind that the effect that I've had in a person's life might not be able to be measured immediately as this outcome that the government or that the grant is requiring. And so, yes, those are hoops we have to jump through, but that's not the final measure. That's not the final outcome, because we don't know the story till it's over.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that's not why we did this work. We didn't do this work so we could get federal contracts. There's a guy who does, I can't remember his name, fascinating guy. He works with therapists, and he has a system set up where after every therapy session, a client will, in your office or right outside your office, will get on a laptop and type in their feedback on the session. And you do that, if you see 6 clients a day, you do that for long enough, you're going to see some really cool trends. That could really transform your work because you're getting that immediate feedback. He's asked me to be a pilot for him. I can't do it because I know what I'll end up doing. Okay, logging on after every session. What do they think? What do they think? And, and I'm going to stop losing my sense of what do I need to be doing to help this person and trying to focus on what do I do to get good scores. I know I'm not strong enough to do what you just talked about, what both of you talked about. The problem is, as leaders in these programs, if that's our focus, is the numbers, people like me will buy into it and burn out. Yeah.
What can you actually do? I don't know, like for example, in my case, when I first started in the program, like that first week, I knew that the situation was the unorganization they had in the program that was not permitting them to provide services correctly and to have the outcomes or abide to the numbers required by the grant. So when they first told me like, oh, how are you feeling? I'm like, lost. I was sincere. I told them, I feel lost because, I don't feel like there's a certain organization, priorities, standardized and things like that. And so, like, every time my supervisor would see me, oh, yeah, we need some organization. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not working on it. So, like, in my case, I'm only just a translator. Like, what can I do, or probably would you suggest so that, for me not to burn out, just to comply, like, with my requirements and things like that?
Sure. Well, first thing is, get rid of the concept that you're just a translator. Did anybody else ping on that one? Like this guy is just not just a translator. I mean, you can just feel it from him. He's a lot more than that. Well, what's your responsibility to the organization? What's the myth of that you could get responsible for? You could get responsible for fixing this problem. It's not your problem to fix. Okay? You can't fix it. It's causing you problems, but it's not your problem to fix. So what's your responsibility to the organization? Your responsibility to the organization is to carefully, diplomatically point out this issue. And it sounds like you did because, the supervisor is saying, yeah, we got to get to that, meaning that he or she heard you. But, yeah, the system's not adapting. Now, the problem is if you take that personally, as if you are responsible for this, then you'll continue to complain. And then it's no longer of, hey, he's got a good idea. It's, hey, he's a pain in the rear. So what more can you do? Probably not much. Yes, sir. Well, yes, there is. What do you think?
You have a skill that everybody else doesn't have, and that skill is communicated through different languages. But you also have to, in your translation, translate the culture, because that can make a difference in how you go about solving the problem. And the culture difference can be the solution.
Okay. Okay, good. So let me just talk about some more what you can do. It was a good transition to the next section, so thank you. What do you do? Okay, this is the first one that I would want you to think about. Sorry, not what can you do. I'm talking more general now, sorry. I segued off of your concept.
It seems to me the battlefield is really in our minds and hearts first, to give ourselves permission to just stop at that line and taking responsibility too. I was asked once to be on staff and do two full-time jobs.
Right.
And I knew it was just going to burn out. So I went to the elders and I said, well, here's what I'll do. I'll give my whole heart, but I'm not going to sacrifice my family on the altar of ministry. There's a lot of pressure on pastors to just go and support everybody and everything. And they bobbed their heads, oh, we wouldn't want you to. But then they really did. And so I had to guard that line and continue to give myself permission. And I remember it came to a critical point where I was teaching a class on pastoral care, and I was preparing for the class. I only had 2 hours that week, and I was really sad. It's like, I want to give this my best. I love this class. I'm just, giving a little bit to it. And I remember just inside myself, I had to give myself permission. It's like, wait a minute. This week, this is your best. That's all that you had to give. You're giving it. Enjoy the class. And so it was in my mind and heart first. I had to give myself permission to live out of the values you're talking about and maintain and cultivate that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that's always I will insult myself because of how little I know about the Muslim faith, but You know, we use this word jihad a lot, and in the Muslim faith, the jihad is within ourselves. You know, it's one of the biggest things, that word, the war, is within ourselves. You know, it's the struggles between two things that we're constantly struggling with. And that's one of the things you're talking about. It's making these decisions on our own and deciding to do this and making the ability to say no. And as a program manager, you know, encouraging your staff, say no to me if I'm asking for more than you think you can handle if you are beginning to burn out because I'm asking too much volume, or too much, like expecting a change that I know you cannot produce. Let me know. Tell me no. It's hard. It's hard to do with the pressures that we have. So these are some basics. These are some things that are a little bit different than the typical burnout prevention ideas, but these are things that people can incorporate relatively quickly. First one is don't vent so much. Don't vent. Okay? We're not a tea kettle. We're not a tea kettle. Our pressure does not build up. Okay? It's not like we have to be vented. Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm not sure how many of you know of Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Buddhist monk. He writes a lot. He wrote a book on anger. And one of the things that he talked about was, this is just a wonderful phrase, is there is no releasing anger. There is only rehearsing it. There's no releasing anger. There's only rehearsing it. And then right around the same time that I read that book, I read this study on the cortisol response of venting. That when we vent, we used to think for years venting was good. You remember, I don't know how many old marriage therapists there might be here, the Patakas, I think is what they were called. You know, primal scream therapy. Felt so good for about 45 seconds to a minute. Because that first 45 seconds to a minute, our body is producing adrenaline. And an adrenaline surge feels pretty good. But it's also producing cortisols, shooting out cortisols in our system. And we don't feel those right away. But for the next 4 hours, we feel like crap. Pardon me. We feel bad. Cortisols are the inflammatory chemicals, okay, that produce inflammation, produce headaches, produce crankiness. So when we vent, we feel good. For a little while, I feel so much better. You know, therapists have the term catharsis. It's a cathartic response. And then we don't feel good. So venting is not a good thing. You know, this is just, getting to, well, I'll talk about this next one in a minute, but another thing to watch for is triangles. This is a big Bowen concept as well, is that we tend to want to stabilize stressful situations by including somebody else. Okay? We were talking at lunch, let's say, and, I said something you were pretty offended by. You're like, I don't know about that guy. He's kind of offensive. So instead of talking with me about it, you're going to talk to Charles about it. So you're like, did you hear what Neil said to me? I'm such a jerk. That's a triangle. Instead of coming to me with the issue, you're going to go to somebody else. Okay. Now you're a part of the triangle. I'm a part of the triangle, although I'm not really active in the triangle. But watch for triangles. As a manager, but also as yourself, are you pulling in people and just, I have to tell you what happened this time? Anybody guilty of that? My goodness, I'm guilty of that. Yes. Can you believe what she said at that meeting? Now, there's two pieces of that. One is to be the triangulator, and the other one is to be the receiver of the triangle. And let me give you a really simple little powerful, I think, technique with that. If you're the person that's doing the triangulating, obviously, stop doing it. Simple, not easy. But if you've been triangled in, listen for a minute, and then let's say, you're telling me how offensive he just was at lunch. You're telling me, can't believe what he said and stuff. And the thing to do is to say, what we want to say is, well, did you talk to him about it? Instead, try this once or twice. It's really interesting. Well, what did he say when you talked to him about it? Now, the cool part about that is I'm not challenging him. I'm assuming he did the right thing to start with. Well, what did he say when you talked to him about it? And you're going to be like, well, I didn't really talk to him about it yet. I'll be curious what he says. Because, I'm not sure whether he, we can apologize for him. That's what I would want to do somehow, be an apologist. Say, maybe you took it out of context, or, he's really not that bad. He seems like a nice guy. But now you see how I'm still supporting the triangle. I'm still kind of getting in the middle of this thing. I'm either going to be, if I think you're a jerk, I'm going to reinforce what you say. If I think you're a good guy, I'm going to try to reinforce that you're a good guy. But instead, I'm just kind of assuming that you talked to him. So what happened when you talked to her about that? Well, I didn't really talk to her about it yet. Oh, okay. Great little thing. Very powerful. And people will stop coming to you and venting when you do that. It only takes once. It only takes once. All right. Obviously, we talked about this a lot. Don't take it personally. Constantly, there's certain things that I keep in mind in my head when I'm working on relationships. Is one, don't take it personally. Am I taking it personally? Am I taking it seriously? That's a big one for me. And am I becoming responsible for or responsible to? Another big one. Does anybody have the time? 10:20. How long do I talk till? 10:45? Oh, we'll get out here before that. I hope. I say that now. Yeah, we will. Okay. It's like the first and the last session of the day are always the ones that are hard to stay focused. Okay, what to do? Give work only one slice of your pie. You talked about you have a great personal life. You've got great things going on in your life. Make sure that that's happening. Again, that's a little bit more about self-care, but I like the idea of looking at it as a pie. That when you're leaving work, now, like I said, I work all the time, but my clinical work, which is the most exhausting burnout-wise, I leave it at work. I leave at work. I don't bring anything home. I have to deal with phone calls and emergencies occasionally, but I really try not to churn on that. My kids, my wife, how was work? It was good. And that's it. Because I really have to turn that off. It's the only way I've been able to do this work for, do an intensive full-time practice for 20 years and not burn out on it, because I deal with a lot of intense cases. I have to cut that slice off. Like, just no emails or phone calls at home. Try to create some sanctuary. If you can't create a sanctuary time. You set the boundary for that. Don't try to set the boundaries on other people. The problem with that is, how many people have work email on their phones? Yeah. That's hard. You can choose not to read them. Yes, you can choose not to read them. I love my Android because my Gmail, when I had an iPhone and my iPad, it has a kind of a unified inbox. And so I see everything because I have 3 or 4 emails. But I love my Android phone because I don't have a unified inbox. I can only see one email account at a time. So I can not look at certain email accounts and just choose not to look at that during times. It doesn't just pop into the unified inbox. Avoid the break room. This is a nice break room, by the way. When I do this training for teachers, avoid the teacher's lounge. The healthiest teachers don't go to the teacher's lounge for lunch because it's poison. It's poison there because it's the people that want to vent that are there. The concept is not necessarily avoiding the break room or the lunchroom. The idea is avoid those people who are going to be poisonous. You know who they are in your organization. Hopefully it's not you. Well, it won't be you after today. But you know what I mean? It's just the theory about, we had this theory that, again, I love when we have these theories that are just completely turned on their ear because no one's ever tested them. One of the theories is that, misery loves company. Somehow it provides support. That really miserable situations that if you talk about it with other people in misery, it helps you. It doesn't. It makes it worse. And that's been borne out very strongly with some recent research. So getting together with other people that are feeling it and talking about it just is going to make you feel worse. It will just make you feel worse. So avoid those places, those people that are just going to bring you down. Okay? Talked about this. Again, using it as a mantra in your head. Am I responsible for this? Am I responsible to this? Okay. Any questions right now? Thoughts so far? Well, we're almost done, but yes.
Comment for me. I'm a Navy chaplain, and I deployed in 2010 to Kandahar, Afghanistan, kind of in the middle of a very staff-oriented tour, as in I was working in Washington, D.C. Went from there. I kind of saw a lot of parallels between Washington, D.C. and a combat zone, but I'll leave that aside. And 6 months ago, I PCS, I transferred to a new job with the largest staff, largest budget, largest geographical area involved, working for an admiral, all those kinds of things. And listening to, taking part in your presentation today has helped me kind of realize some things about what I've learned and the way I've grown, and especially coming out of my combat deployment. It helped me, it really has helped me, and specifically in my current job, not to allow people to pressure me into taking responsibility for their expectations of me. It's a lot of demands, a lot of different requirements coming from differing directions. But I have what I call Kandahar roles. I ask, in the midst of a stressful moment, stressful challenge, I ask myself, let's see, are there incoming rockets? Has anyone been blown up? Is anyone bleeding to death? Has anyone died? If the answer to those questions are no, then it's really not bad.
Right. It gives you a completely different sense of perspective of the immediacy of the situation and how I've got to react to this and what do I have to drop. Great example. Thank you. I have a couple more things I want to show you, but in the meantime, while we're doing that, I'd love to get your name and email address so I can stay connected to you. I send out, not very often, maybe once a month, ideas, things that I come across that I think might be helpful for marriage educators, parenting educators. So if you wouldn't mind just writing your name and email on this, if you'd prefer not to, obviously you don't need to, but that would be wonderful. You just pass it around this way.
I have a quick suggestion. I don't need the mic.
Okay.
If you Google differentiation of self, one of the first hits is an article by Marie Bowman.
Right.
And it's like a two-pager, and it kind of explains the concept and why bullies aren't self-differentiated.
Right.
I love that article, that concept. I met Hal last year.
Okay.
So then after that, I researched Bowman.
Differentiate, yeah.
But
So
it's just Google differentiation of self.
differentiate of self, Google differentiation of self, and then one of the first hits is a two-page article by Murray Bowen that really explains this really well. So thank you. Okay, cool. All right, so if you like this idea, if you like some of this stuff, just a little bit more about myself. I love doing trainings, and I love doing staff trainings. I love doing parenting work, consultations. One additional plug for my book. It's available on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Nook, just about any bookstore can order it. It's fortunately in a lot of bookstores right now as they're ramping up for the fall. I'd love your feedback on it if you do pick one up. If I did give you one of my requirements, although I can't really enforce this obviously, is I'd love for you to do a quick feedback if you have an Amazon account, to do a review on Amazon. Just helps my ranking with Amazon the more reviews I have. Good reviews are always preferable, but I want your honest review, since I'll get kicked off of Amazon if I ask for good reviews. They don't like that. So hopefully you grabbed one of my cards or some of my information. I have my contact information on everything. I did this really interesting. What time is it again? 10:28. Okay, good. Okay, I did this really. I want to share this because it's kind of fun, particularly if you're a parent or you work with parents. I did this really interesting thing for one of the chapters in my book. I think it was chapter 9, where I wanted to get students' perspectives of their parents. It's a fascinating thing to do. So I was invited by my son's 7th grade English teacher to come in and talk about book publishing, writing a book, becoming an author. And I'm like, no, they're going to help me write a chapter. This will be their chapter, and they will be in the acknowledgments, and they are in the acknowledgments of the book. They'll be a part of this process. I want them to help me write a chapter, and then we're going to do an edit of the chapter, and then we're going to put it in the book as they edited it. So they were so excited about it, and the teacher was obviously very excited about it. So the questions I asked them were, the kind of paragraph starters were, when it comes to my parents and schoolwork, I wish they would, and I wish they wouldn't. ... Fill in the blank. And they wrote on it. And then I took that information and kind of listed it. I just have a big list in the book of what they said. And then I kind of I crystallized it and discussed it because there was so many commonalities. One of the things I did with it was I put together a little PowerPoint slideshow with some of the themes that I saw over and over again. I want to share it with you just because it's a fun little slideshow, and we have time for it. Sorry about that. Sounds like my phone. It was stunning over and over and over again. Back off, or at least back up. Don't back off. I need you. Trust me. Believe in me. In fact, one kid said, don't believe me all the time because I will lie, but believe in me. Such an interesting shift that, so many times parents lose faith in their children that they want, I don't even think he wants to do good. Of course he does. I have not met a kid yet who doesn't want to do well in life. I just haven't. They'll say that sometimes to their parents, but they don't mean it. So that really fascinating thing is believe in me. Trust me, we want the same thing. And keep that in mind when we're doing our work as well. What is the goal of what we're doing? When we begin to lose that sense of what we're about and why we're doing this work, that's when there's a greater likelihood of burnout. The pressures on us are legion. There are a ton of pressures to take this personally, to take on things that you can't do. There's only one person that's going to be able to stop that, though, to be able to say no when you need to say no, and that's yourself. So Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I'll be around, and if you have any other questions, hopefully you grabbed one of my cards. Don't hesitate to send me an email.